Okay, so to start this sort of designing process, this is your project packet. In the project packet, towards the back are the design worksheets, okay? In it is also just a handout about how you can abstract. On this, I have an example of how I just basically abstracted this leaf design and how it kind of went through different processes. It's hard to kind of break it down, but basically I started with that and then I moved to this because with your project, you have to have at least 3 cutouts from the inside, okay? So this version, although it looks fine, would not have worked. It only has 2 cutouts. I had to add a 3rd, so that's how I did that. And then I just made some adjustments to the outside. And this one right here was, for me, taking my initials, S and G, and this was my initial sort of first step in abstracting it. I basically took the letters and broke them down into 2 sections. And then I simplified it even more because in this situation I have 4 shapes. You want to make sure that you have an odd number. So that would not work because it's an even number. I didn't want to go up to 5 because 5 cutouts in a small piece of metal like this is really difficult to do. The smaller the shapes, the harder it is to cut them out. So what I did was instead of go to 5, I went to 3. So I went down. And that's the final design that it came up for that, okay? This worksheet right here is the final worksheet. We're not going to do that right now, obviously. So right now what I'm going to talk to you guys about is how to come up with just sort of your initial ideas, okay? These are some things that you do want to think about. Some of the things that I would recommend. It's almost the same as the ceramics project. I would recommend doing an asymmetrical design. Because again, and we're not robots, okay, so this is what you have to consider. We're human beings. We are perfectly imperfect. So to be able to cut a piece of metal out so that 2 sides look exactly the same is really, really difficult. So I would not recommend it. I would do an asymmetrical design. But I'm not going to say no to you if you want to do a symmetrical design. But I will tell you that if you want to do a symmetrical design, it needs to be symmetrical for you to get a good grade on that. So if it does not turn out that way, you're going to see that reflected in your grade. Positive and negative space. The negative space are the cutouts. And the positive space will be the metal that's left over. We want to have more cutouts than metal. The less metal that you actually have sort of there is less metal for you to sand later. And believe me, you're going to be happy that I made you do that when it comes to the sanding parts, okay? For the purpose, you want to think about, okay, what do you want to use this for? Is this something that you might hang on a keychain? Is this something that you want to just hang somewhere in your room or off your car windshield or your rear view mirror? You got to think about stuff like that. So how are you going to use it? Some kids like to use these also too for bookmarks or just to have something in their purse or walking around with. Aesthetics has to deal with just how it looks. So we want to make sure that the design itself looks good. As far as shapes go, you want to avoid anything that's radial, and radial would be anything that's kind of based off of a center, which does tend to work towards or lean towards symmetrical. So if you were to do a flower, you know, you don't want to have something like this where you are leaning towards something symmetrical. So that would be radial. Geometric shapes can be difficult to do, but there is a way that you can design it so that, again, you could get around some of that stuff. So as far as geometric goes, I wouldn't try to pull off like squares, rectangles. Circles are really, really hard. But what you can do is kind of make shapes that are geometric inspired. The one that I do recommend the most, which is the easiest, is the organic. So these are shapes that are irregular. If you accidentally cut out that design a little different, you can still make it work. Whereas if you don't cut out a circle right, or you don't cut out a square correctly, it's going to look wrong. So that's why I said that. Repetition is good, so a lot of times you can get away with even coming up with one shape and just repeating it over and over again in different sizes, so that is something that is recommended. Unity, you just want to make sure the outside and the inside design work well together. And then as far as the design goes, it needs to either be abstract or non-objective. Non-objective basically means that it's not recognizable as any image or object. So there's all of that. So here are some of the rules down here. You do not have to worry about these rules down here, 6 and 7, when it comes to the measurements. We will worry about that when we do our final sketch. So to get this started, so this is the back of the worksheet. Okay, I've got 2 examples down here. Instead of doing my initials on this one, I just wanted to abstract my first letter in my last name. So I just did G. I thought it was cool, so I just did the G rather than trying to squeeze an S in there. And this is my abstract design for a leaf. And then, of course, you saw these examples. It says Lakota West, okay? And then this one here where a student abstracted a bird. What I'm going to do, just to kind of get you guys started, I've got these examples here. Bugs are actually really good references for metals designs. Flowers, anything natural is good. And then I will have at your tables packets of letters. So I have a letter for each, or a letter for each letter in the, or a sheet for each letter in the alphabet. So you can grab these and you can look at these shapes too. So you can do that. So let's see here. What will I do? All right, so I'll do one here, and I've got 2 different shapes here. Now these shapes in here represent the size of the metal. So when you are designing this, if you guys look at these down here at the bottom, I am making my design as large as I possibly can. That is the key for this. This project is a little sneaky in the sense that a lot of kids think, well, if I make my project smaller, it'll make it easier. If you make your project smaller, it actually makes it harder because you're dealing with metal. So you want to maximize the amount of metal that you're actually using. So these boxes represent the actual size of metal that you guys will get. So you have 2 choices, okay? So with something like this beetle, what I can do, and this is just kind of, I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you guys can see the whole thing. What I like to do with these is just take pieces apart. So if you look at this, this is very symmetrical. So what I'm going to do is kind of take inspiration from those shapes. So I'm going to use this kind of triangle-ish shape. And I'm just going to pull things out from that. Now I like to start by designing the inside first. So I'm going to take that big shape right here, put it right here, and let's see where it goes. And then I like how he's got these 2 parts right here that are next to it. So I'm going to see what I can do with those. I'm not, again, going to worry about measurements here. I'm just going to think about just the design. And these are cut, they have to be cut out. So I'm just doing shapes here. So if I come up with something like that, then what I can do is then draw around it for the outside. So I always, and again, everybody's different. Some people like to start with the outside first and then work their way in. I like to do the opposite. So after I get the inside kind of design, then what I will do is go around and just kind of basically trace around this. And there's my initial. And then after I'm done with that, then I can change, I can kind of move things around. I've got lots of space here. So what I can do is erase this, pull this out. I don't necessarily want that to go all the way down. So this is where I start playing with stuff. And try to utilize that space a little bit more. If I can do that, I can pull this out, I can pull that up. Kind of like this shape, so. Pull this up higher. And so basically that beetle just becomes a starting point for me. I'm not so concerned about this looking like an actual beetle. I'm just using it as sort of inspiration for these shapes. So I kind of play around with it until I'm happy with it. And once I'm happy with it, I can move on to a different idea. For like one of these letters, and I can kind of show you. I'm going to try my M. My middle initial is M. Now what I do have, some kids, what they'll do is they like to trace these shapes and then they'll go in and they'll fix them up. You can do it that way, or you can just kind of go right at it. So I'm going to kind of use this as an idea, or maybe a combination of these two. And again, now this is how you can get around geometric shapes. So I'm not really doing geometric shapes like traditional shapes like squares, rectangles, triangles, and circles. I'm using geometric inspired shapes, so I'm changing them. I don't want to get into, I'm kind of leaning towards symmetrical here, but I don't want to. So I'm going to change this up. So again, play around with that later. I'm going to try to get this so it doesn't look so symmetrical. It's kind of hard actually with an M not to do that. To make that smaller. And then again, after I get my initial shapes in, remember you want at least 3. Then what I can do is go in and add the outside of this. Try to get a little notch in there. And there's that. And then again, I'd go through and I'd fix it up. I've always got room here. I can expand that out, make this bigger, which would again help me get away from doing something super symmetrical. So I can make this bigger. So that's basically initially how I start sketching these ideas out. What you guys can do, you can look at references on your phones for bugs, plants, whatever, birds, animals. You can look at stuff like that. You want to keep your amount of inside shapes at 3 and stay away from anything symmetrical or, you know, using traditional geometric shapes. I'll also show you too here real quick. Here are some actual metal pieces. So this is inspired by a butterfly wing. And this is basically what we're going to do is once we get our final design done, you'll cut out the paper, we'll glue it onto the metal, and then we're going to cut around it. So that's how that's going to work. And then this was inspired by a seashell. And that was the leaf design that you see down here, kind of. It's been changed a lot. So, and it's actually been I've already started cutting it out. So that's how that looks. So you want 3 inside shapes, 1 outside shape. Okay, I've got letters for you guys if you want to use those, and you can look for the rest on your phones. So there you go. That's it.